and welcome to Dateline London. The Obama administration at odds with Israel over Iran, the Iraqi offensive against so-called Islamic State, and does it really matter whether we have general election leaders debates in Britain? My guests this week are Abdul Bari Atwan, who's an Arab writer and broadcaster, Jonathan Sakadotti of I24 News, John Fisher-Burns of the New York Times, and Polly Toynbee of The Guardian. Very good to see you all. The people of Israel go to the polls later this month, and the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was no doubt delighted to be invited to address the United States Congress. He used his big moment to make clear the differences with the Obama administration over Iran's nuclear program. Is this a serious breach, and is the only winner likely to be Iran? How do you see it, Jonathan?
In a way, I think what we've got to do is separate out all the discussion about whether or not he should have given the speech and whether that created some sort of theatre of politics in Washington, D.C., from the actual message of the speech, which clearly was very heartfelt on his part. And that is that we're getting dangerously close to doing a deal with Iran that could see it have nuclear weapons. And that's something that isn't just a danger for Israel, but it's also a danger for the whole region and indeed for the West. And we saw that the response to that, even in the run-up to it and after it, was that not only was Benjamin Netanyahu, as he said, speaking for the Jewish people, in some ways he was speaking for many Arab people. We've seen the editor of Al Arabiya in English coming out strongly saying that Obama should actually listen to what Netanyahu was saying about the Iranians, their state sponsorship of terror across the world, their pursuit of nuclear weapons capability. And we also saw just in the last week or two the IAEA saying that it was not able to get enough evidence that Iran wasn't actually pursuing nuclear weapons capability. With all of these bits of the jigsaw puzzle fitting together and the deadline for the actual P5+1 negotiations ending up perhaps in a deal, it's understandable that there was this split over what he was saying, but it's also very important to listen to the root message of the speech itself.
How do you see it, Barry? Because it is certainly true that some states, Gulf states, I've been there talking to some of their leaders who say, we do not want to live under the shadow, as they put it, of the Persian bomb.
But they have been living under the Israeli bombs, Israeli nuclear warheads for the last 50 years or so. So why they cannot live under the threat of Iran, if there is a threat? I believe what's the alternative for this deal, which actually the superpowers are negotiating with the Israelis? If there is a deal, why not? Why we can't have a deal to freeze the Iranian nuclear programs, infrastructure for the coming 10 years? And after that, we don't know what will happen. So I believe, what's the alternative? To fight a war in the Middle East? I believe Netanyahu, honestly, provoked everybody, provoked the American, provoked the Jews, provoked the Arabs by going and presenting himself as the leader of actually the Middle East, the leader of even the American themselves, telling the American what to do. Who is he to tell the American what to do?
What do you think?
I agree on the point of process, that it was a maladroit thing to do, and politically risky, in effect, to confront the President of the United States through the occasion of speaking to a joint House of Congress. There were other ways that he could, and has, in fact, made his position clear. But the other, on the matter of substance, is if not a solution through diplomacy, then what? And we know that the more right-wing elements of the Israeli government have for some time wanted American sanctioned airstrikes against and goodness knows where that would lead to. And I would say a final point in this is that the United States, the West, have missed opportunities over the last 10 or 15 years for some sort of broader reconciliation with Iran. During the presidency of Khatami, in particular, time when I was spending a good deal of time in Iran. And it seems to me there is at least a possibility with the new president of Iran and the bite that sanctions are having on Iran's oil exports, that there is an opportunity for a negotiated settlement, and that we should pursue that as far as we can.
Polly, how do you see this? Because the skeptics about Iran say, since 1979, we've been looking for moderates in Iran that we can talk to, and it's always failed.
It seems an extraordinarily inept time. I mean, I know it's for his own electoral timetable that Netanyahu should have done this, but it creates a serious rift with America. All right, you can get some rowdy Republicans to cheer him, but to do something that is absolutely against the interests of the president of the day is very bad diplomacy. I mean, Israel needs American support. It's putting that at risk. It's interesting that within Israel, you've had the former head of Mossad, you've had 200 generals and others coming out saying this is really putting Israel at risk. This is not the way to go forward. But there we are with Iran backing the only hope of pushing ISIS out of Iraq. You've got Sunni and Shia fighting together, which is astonishing, in Iraq, backed by Iran, to push them back. You see the horror, the world is transfixed by the horror of ISIS. Are you really going to put all of that at risk because Netanyahu wants to be re-elected on a sort of far right-wing ticket? It's frivolous politics.
Frivolous politics.
Well, I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding of Israeli politics to characterise Netanyahu as far right. I mean, certainly he's more right of centre, certainly. But regardless of that, I think that a lot has been made over whether or not this will improve his chances in the upcoming elections on the 17th. Of course, Netanyahu is a seasoned politician. He won't be sorry if he gets a few extra votes for this.
Do you think he will? I mean,
there's been a mixed response in Israel over whether or not this helps or not. It's polarised things just as much there, as you say. So I think to call it an electioneering strategy alone is perhaps not to give him his dues, which is to say this is a man who is interested in taking political risks, and he does need US help. It's absolutely right. I think that Netanyahu sees the situation as quite dire. He doesn't feel he's getting the support he needs from the US, and this is really betting the farm on what he needs to happen. In a way, he was going to Washington, D.C. to remind the American people through the House of Congress that they need to remember what they're dealing with Iran. We can't really call Rouhani a moderate in true terms. This is a man who oversaw more executions in the first 6 months of his term than shortly before that.
Remember what we've just seen in terms of Netanyahu's absolute abuse of the evidence of what Iran had in the way of how far they were along the line towards nuclear weapons. He arrived at the UN with his splendid graphic that it turned out that Mossad, his own secret service, had said this is not true. They are not.
Well, no, there was a slight twisting of
and he
the
did it before. He's always predicted. He's always predicted. Right back in 1999, he said they were on the verge of having the nuclear weapon. Turns out not to be true. And it does seem that the moderates in Iran are making a lot of headway. Is this really the point, to push them back into the far right of Iran by breaking off any negotiations?
That's the right reading of the region. I think the closer that you get to the Middle East, the more you feel the heat there. So I would say that the moderates in Iran making headway is perhaps a very strange way to describe what happened when we saw that the US could have supported the democratic revolution that was taking place, and instead it supported the quashing of those rebels. Instead, what we've seen is a government that looks more moderate to some, but really isn't. And we don't need to trust Netanyahu alone. We can look at the IAEA's evidence on Iran's nuclear intentions
How long would
and see
that
exactly what they
moderation
have.
last if this ended up with Israeli or American airstrikes against the nuclear facilities in Iran?
I would not like to see airstrikes at all.
So what is Netanyahu proposing as an option?
I think that what Netanyahu was pressing for, as far as I could see it, was not to weaken the sanctions just as they're starting to work, not to remove the ability to put sanctions in place so that the negotiations would have more bite.
But a final word on this.
I
want to move on to the other wider Iranian-Iraqi issue.
First, actually, he embarrassed the president of the most powerful country in the world and the most, ally or the best ally of Israel, which actually helped. Without America, Israel wouldn't survive for the last 60 years or so. So I don't know what kind of diplomacy is this. He split the Jews themselves. But talking about the sanction, while Iran is under the sanction, what Iran did? Iran is controlling the whole of the Middle East. They are controlling Yemen, they are controlling Iraq, they are controlling Syria, they are controlling Lebanon. So this is without the sanction. The sanction was not working. So Obama was right to strike this sanction deal.
Okay, to the table.
Okay, because I want to move on to precisely this issue, because as Polly was suggesting, Iraqi troops backed up by Iran